Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Radio OPAC, a weekly conversation series occurring Wednesdays at 12 o'clock Eastern Time over Facebook Live on the Ohio Prison Arts Connection Facebook page. The day is December 2nd, 2020, and a special welcome goes out to all of our audience members who are seeing this from inside of a correctional institution. Which the Ohio Prison Arts Connection is helping to facilitate by a DVD copy shared with several Ohio prisons. So a special welcome goes out to them, but of course, welcome to everyone viewing this today. My name is Jared Small, and I am on the steering committee of the Ohio Prison Arts Connection, which is a group of stakeholders around the state of Ohio, whose mission is to connect the arts to those who are justice involved. Thank you again for joining us, everyone. And I am here in conversation today with Dr. Mary Cohen. Dr. Cohen is Associate Professor of Music Education at the University of Iowa, whose work and research focuses on wellness through music making, and a particular emphasis in the prison context, of course, as well as writing and songwriting and collaborative communities. So extremely excited to be in conversation here today with Dr. Cohen. Hello, Dr. Cohen. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Jared. It's a pleasure to talk with you. I am well today. Thank you.
Fabulous. Yeah, pleasure as well. Likewise. So today we're going to talk with you, Dr. Cohen, about your work, of course, in the prison context, but specifically some notions that you've been kind of chewing on for a bit of time now, including peace building, the values of healing, and even kind of some of the broader social constructs and systems that exist, and maybe why it might be time to do some rethinking and reshifting of those social systems. So a lot on the plate to talk about today. Of course, we're excited to get to it, but before we kind of dive in, I'm wondering, Mary, if you can tell us a bit just about yourself, just maybe baseline, who are you? And what do you do? What ought our audience know about Dr. Mary Cohen?
Well, that's a big question, and it's a pretty fun one to start with. So let's see. I am a person that loves to dance. I love to move. I love my meditation practice. Professionally, personally, I have a beautiful husband of many years. Professionally, I am like you mentioned, a music education professor. That my job bridges two colleges, a College of Education and the School of Music. I have two amazing colleagues in the music education area at the University of Iowa. So prior to that, I worked in the K-12 schools. I taught for 10 years in both private and public schools, facilitating music making primarily for elementary age children. I also directed choirs. And it was actually while I was teaching elementary school at Stanley Elementary in Overland Park in Blue Valley School District in Kansas, a suburb of Kansas City, where I noticed one Sunday reading the Kansas City Arts section that a choir called the East Hill Singers was performing a few miles away from where I lived. Out of curiosity, I went to a concert and was blown away. This is a choir that Elvira Voth at age 70 began, the Lansing Correctional Facility in Kansas. And this choir, the men in custody, leave the prison and join a group of outside volunteers, and together they sing in the community. And I was blown away at so many levels of the parallel of people singing in unison and in harmony together as a group, that collaborative community. Coming into my PhD program, I studied that particular project in many levels and enjoyed the process of more I learned about this topic, the more curious I became, and questioning critically and thinking constructively what might be able to happen with music education in prisons. And I've been researching that through my own practice with the Oakdale Choir, as well as my own research in lots of different contexts, looking at questions of what does this mean to have music education in this prison context, and where are we, as you mentioned in your note a bit ago, as a society, and what do we need to rethink? So
Wow. it's a heavy load, but one that
Yeah.
I'm particularly fascinated about as a music educator myself. It's incredibly interesting. But I want to maybe just make a little connection here. We are the Ohio Prison Arts Connection after all. But you actually have a connection to a few of our previous Radio OPAC guests, specifically Ethan and Dan of the New York City-based Heartbeat Opera, and which actually also connected your work in Iowa to the work that has happened in the Ohio system. And I'm wondering if you can just tell our viewers, share just a little bit about your work with Heartbeat Opera previously, what that entailed, maybe that connection to Ohio, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. And it's interesting because there are, again, like you mentioned, lots of levels of connection. One of the connections of how Dan and Ethan learned about me was through their friend, Amanda Weber. Amanda, as you may know, finished her doctorate at University of Minnesota, and she began the Voices of Hope chorus. And prior to her starting that chorus, she came to Iowa and participated in one of our summer songwriting workshops. And we had like a 3-hour coffee date the next day and just talked, and it was brilliant. So anyway, when Dan and Ethan were planning to put together their piece that you've just mentioned, the Fidelio, based on Black Lives Matter, they reached out to lots of different people that lead music programs, choirs in prisons. And so one of them was the Oakdale Choir. So interestingly, their first visit inside of a prison was this image you see behind me, the Oakdale Prison, officially the Iowa Medical and Classification Center gymnasium, where we made the recording of our portion of the Prisoner's Chorus. So it was a great opportunity to connect with them. I was also lucky enough to travel to New York and see the performance happen in New York in May of 2018. Do I have the year right? Yeah. And anyway, it was just interesting in so many levels because, as we all know, we have what, 2.3 million people in prison, but yet, as this author John Pfaff has said in his book Locked In, we really have 4,133 different stories of prison growth, one for every county in the country. And so Dan and Ethan and their tour of all these prisons started out with Oakdale, where we had Jim McKinney as warden that welcomed him, and we had dogs in the choir, and it was a pretty warm, welcoming type experience compared to other prisons that don't have that same. And of course, now with COVID, there's just such a need to decarcerate, a huge need to decarcerate. And I hope people start to see that and start making some changes.
Thank you for that. It's incredibly powerful work, the Fidelio Project, and we'll try to share some more resources down below in the comments about it. But something that I know Dr. Kathy Roma had been intimately involved in as well.
Yes.
In here in Ohio. So those connections in the community of the arts in carceral settings is quite powerful, alive and well in the country. But
I'm right on. I was just going to mention, I think maybe you were just alluding to it, that in addition to my connection with Dan and Ethan and Amanda Weber, of course, I'm connected with Kathy Roma. I'm not even sure if you know that before I started the Oakdale Choir, when I was just trying to understand what was happening with music in prisons and choral singing, I visited Ohio. It would have been in May of, I think it was May, but it was in the year 2008 when I went in with Kathy to one of the prisons where she was leading her choir and got to meet Eddie Robertson, for example.
Yes. Story about Eddie Robertson. His music is actually what you have heard at the beginning of this, and you'll hear at the tail end of our conversation too. So everyone, you get to become intimately familiar with Eddie's own artistic work. It's wonderful. So I'm glad you brought it up. Thanks.
Yeah, I've written a letter to the governor of Ohio on Eddie's behalf, connected with Eddie's sister. So the collaborative connections are just so important, and the arts and music especially is such a conduit to make those connections in important ways.
Yeah, thank you for that, for all that you do, certainly. I want to touch on this notion of peace building, because I know you've got classes about it, and that it's kind of forms somewhat of a crux with a lot of what you and I have discussed kind of offline, and I'm really fascinated by it. And of course, the idea of peace building and how music and music education play into that is really interesting to me. And you said something last time we spoke, Mary, about so often as music educators or as musicians, it's always about what's right and what's wrong, because you're looking at notes on a page or on a screen, and you play it. There's only so much room for interpretation, and we go from there. But I'm particularly intrigued by piece building and how it might offer us the chance in the music education context to maybe like take a different vector and to move more towards healing than division. So I guess my question is this, I guess it's maybe a multi-part, but can you talk, what is meant by peace building? What do you mean when we say peace building? And how do you see that happening in a musical context, perhaps inside of a prison, perhaps not inside of a prison?
What a brilliant question. And this is the one where I've got my timer on so I can make sure I'm within my block of time here. So when we start talking about peace building, there are a lot of interconnected sections in the scholarly world, because there's an emeritus professor, Hal Popinski, that's written a book about peacemaking and criminology. So that was published, I just read it this morning. Don't remember the year it was published, but 2013, I think. Anyway, so people have been thinking about this for a long time, and even the term peace building has been a development along this process of peace studies, peacemaking, peace building. And in the class that I designed, I did a lot of reading of, there's an organization based in Japan called Minnan Music Research Institute that a man named Olivier Urbain runs. And so there are a lot of resources there that I leaned on. I leaned on John Paul Lederach's book, The Art and Soul, The Moral Imagination, The Art and Soul of Peace Building. I hope I have the title right. Anyway, so the way that I've designed this class is this concept that, and a lot of people have talked about this, Kay Pranis with restorative justice practices, peace building circles, is this idea that, and it's been used in many, many contexts, but it's the idea, somewhat simple, but also difficult to make happen, that peace begins within. So from a sense of inner peace, like in the class that I teach, the students are in one of the core assignment is an inner peace building project. And they have lots of choices of things that they can do, but it's basically looking at how can I be at peace with myself, with who I am. It might be a spiritual practice that they take up, and I give them many, many, many choices. In my own personal life, it's transcendental meditation, hands down. It's that practice of digging, deeply releasing. That is how I practice my inner peace building, along with lots and lots of other support in my life. So from that space of inner peace building, then we are more able to make connections with others. We can call it micro peace building, like peace building within our realm of the people that we interact with. In order to be in a healthy space, emotionally, physically, that needs to happen to be able to move forward. Because we know, for example, in our criminal justice system, there's an idea of revenge, and we can know that revenge can never be satisfied. So we've got to figure out how to be more nourishing and healing internally in order to connect with others. And so now coming into music, you were mentioning the point of there are some philosophies of teaching music, some pedagogies are that there are certain ways to play and certain even styles to play. And guess what? There are other ways of thinking about music making that can kind of balance out the right or wrong approach. For example, there's a brilliant free improvisation program called Music for People. And in the Music for People approach, David Darling founded this, and who, by the way, David's niece Emily was my first yoga teacher in Overland Park.
I love it.
She has a yoga studio called Darling Yoga, and that's how I first learned about Music for People, because she would play these gorgeous cello pieces, and I'm like, what are we listening to? It's my uncle, David Darling. Wow. He's won a Grammy for his CD, Prayer of Compassion.
Is that
beautiful,
right? Oh,
beautiful. David Darling. So anyway, back to the pedagogies. If we can embrace more right ways of doing things in our music making, like their guideline is, there are no wrong notes in Music for People. And there are ways that we can facilitate music making in that context. Now, one great thing to know about related to this idea in prison context is my colleague Andre de Quadros from Boston University. He's created a program called Empowering Song based on Augusto Boal's Theater of the Oppressed.
Okay.
So with what he's done with Empowering Song that he initiated in the Framingham prison in Massachusetts and the Norfolk prison, he's now applied to lots of other choral contexts. He's a beautiful, beautiful programs, all just such a remarkable musician. And in that this book, I think I shared with you before we began the interview, My Body Was Left on the Street, Music Education and Displacement, edited by my colleague Kin Vu and Andre de Quadros. There are 3 chapters by men who were in his Empowering Song class.
Incredible.
So this,
incredible.
yeah, it's brilliant, it's remarkable, and between what we are learning from these researchers that do critical criminology, that do peacemaking and criminology, Kay Pranis, the restorative justice approaches, and then my colleague Kevin Shorner Johnson, who has started a master's degree in music education and peace building at Elizabethtown College.
Right.
This is the time to think in music education in new ways, and it's happening. I mean, people are looking critically. We've got the beautiful program Decolonizing the Music Room that Brandy Pace has created. She was just a keynote just this past Saturday for our Iowa Music Educator Conference. So people are now, and my colleague Ed Zareth at the University of Michigan, he has an organization that I'm a think tank for called the Alliance for the Transformation of the Musical Academy. Because many schools of music in the United States have a certain realm of music making as far as styles that is the primary focus. And we're missing a lot of amazing Black American music in that. So conversations are happening. The time is ripe. There's a lot of things on the plate to answer your question, which is why I went way over how long I planned to go over. So I'll stop and let you lead the conversation the next way.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. It's a notion that I'm really intrigued about. And I'm particularly, I've latched on to the fact that, the music education preparatory coursework in this country, there's a reckoning. I think that's either currently happening or ought to be happening or soon to be reckoning with these kinds of, less Eurocentric methodologies and philosophies and other kinds of ways of thinking and doing. So I am really, just really intrigued about it. And I'm glad to hear you say, the number of your colleagues around the country who are starting these programs or taking these think tanks and these ideas and running with it gives me hope and some inner peace of my own, I might say. So that's everything you say. Yeah, please.
And another thing that brings it back to the notion of abolition, which if the people watching, anybody listening or hearing this conversation that Jared, you and I are having, haven't yet thought about what it means to replace, not repair prisons, that's got to be a core part of this conversation. And the good thing is there are so many brilliant people to lean on, with Angela Y. Davis, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, in the education field, Bettina Love, and the Abolitionist Teaching Network. Again, there are so many things in our social society that are interconnected that have built up the prison industrial complex. We also need to be able to dismantle it from many, 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 many angles. And music education, my colleagues' music education, I hope will see how we can do that, particularly when our book's done, because it's going to really highlight all of these points.
I'm glad you mentioned that. So, of course, the arts are the way for many things, but this, of course, as well. I want to give a quick, just a disclaimer. If you're joining us on the live stream on Facebook, I'm Jared Small with the Ohio Prison Arts Connection. I'm here today with Dr. Mary Cohen, who's Associate Professor of Music Education at the University of Iowa. We've been talking a lot about music making, peacemaking and peace building. What does that look like in carceral settings and community settings? Mary had talked about a soon-to-be coming book. And I want you to talk about that just a little bit. Tell us about what you're working on now.
Sure.
And maybe one or two discoveries that you may have found along the way. I think you kind of alluded to a few of them already, but maybe just a quick summary might do some.
And by the way, it is a first-person plural book. My co-author, Dr. Stuart Paul Duncan, and I together have been developing this for many years. Stuart worked in Auburn, New York, teaching kind of a music theory class. And when he was working on that project, he reached out to me asking some questions about the best way to put the pedagogy together. And immediately I'm like, this is a really brilliant person. I need to make a tight connection and learn from him. So we have been developing this book. The current title is, it begins Freeing Silenced Voices. The second part of the title, we're still actually figuring out music making in US prisons or music making, peace building and abolition of prisons. The second part of the title is not clear. Keep in mind, this is a project we've been working on, Jared, for 10 years. So
right, a work in progress, of course.
and we've signed a contract with Wilfrid Laurier University Press. But what will happen is we're looking at a timeline of finishing the draft by the end of this year. This is 2020, and then it'll go through a formal review process. And so, but as far as the findings, the book is looking at how can music education be one of the tools for abolishing prisons. And what we're doing, there's a lot of very interesting historical research that I have uncovered, like even from 1907 to 1917, there was a music educator in Iowa, James Sanders, that was the warden of the prison, the Iowa State Penitentiary in Fort Madison. So he brought in music. He was one of the first to bring in music into that prison and do the honor code and just really, really change things up. And there were some other prisons at that time that were doing these things. So we have some interesting historical context, but it's really answering the question, why music making in prison? So there's lots and lots and lots of reasons for that. And probably the biggest one that a lot of people think, oh, great, a program with a music program in a prison, that will help the people in custody. But yes, and the bigger group of people that need to learn are all of us outside of prison, to realize how much we're hurting ourselves by having so many people in custody and so many people in the carceral state on probation, parole, or e-monitoring. I mean, it's like 4.5 million plus 2.3 million. It's just problematic in many levels. So the broader public needs to know, and music education is one way to make that happen, along with other arts.
Beautifully said. A great interconnect. This not just for folks on the inside, but folks on the outside too ought to look at music as a way to address some of these societal issues that we face, certainly now more than ever during a pandemic. So we'll keep an eye out for the book, Mary. Thank you for that. That's wonderful. We're coming up on time, and so Mary, every Radio OPAC episode, we conclude our conversation with what we call a moment of reflection. And essentially, it's a way for us to enjoy some creative work, furnished or created even by our guests, and just allow us to take a collective breath as we take a moment to wrap up. So I know you've got a couple pieces to share with us. Could you tell us a bit about the background of what you're going to share as part of our moment of reflection? And I'll make sure I do some tech things on my side so we get the right thing shared. So go ahead and tell us what you're about to share.
Sure, Jared. So the Oakdale Choir we've had a songwriting workshop since we began. We've got over 150 original songs that have been created during our choir season. And so the one I'm going to share today was a collaborative song on many levels. The actual original song is called The Change, and it's based on Gandhi's Be the Change You Want to See in the World. And so the original song is a simple 4-measure canon that I wrote when I was learning in a Dalcroze training class, and it was an assignment to write a canon. And so I took the song, and we actually did it early on, and then I brought it to the Community Music Activity Commission International Conference in Edinburgh, Scotland. And my colleague in the UK, Dave Camlin, took the song. After that conference, we shared it. There were people all over the globe that took the song and used it, like in Australia and other places. So the song's been used, and it's Creative Commons. So it's something anybody can take, use, tweak it, change it how you wish. So what Dave did was he took the song and added this little Game of Thrones mashup with the text, "Who we are, we are." And we added this little improvisation section. Then one of the outside choir members, Maria Coomer, wrote a spoken word poem about Gandhi. And so when you hear the recording at the end of it, you'll hear 2 different inside singers share that. And the message of the song is about change. So in addition to singing together, we have a reflective writing component with the choir. And in one of the reflections about this song, what change do you think needs to happen in the world? this is a little excerpt from the choir website. So one person wrote, "Our justice and correction systems are broken. The overuse of plea bargaining is rampant. The big sentences are absurd. And rehabilitation in many cases is withheld until the end of a sentence. Families are being destroyed in the meantime, and society pays the cost." Another person wrote, "The real changes I see that need to be made are the ones that come from the heart. They are the deepest changes because they are personal. It's not an outside change that makes our lives easier, but an inside one that changes our perspective, our view of people and the world. It changes what we believe and in turn, our attitude and behavior. Compassion, patience, acceptance, forgiveness, generosity, graciousness, love, diligence, resourcefulness, and humility are some positive results in character when those inner changes are made."
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that writing. And we also, of course, have the song to go along with this. So I'm going to do a quick audio share of my laptop, and we are going to listen now to some music. Mary, was there anything else you want to say about the particular song we're going to hear? Or do you feel pretty good about getting ready to share it now?
Sure. Yeah, it was performed in December of 2016 at a concert. So this was a pretty stressful time for a lot of people because it was after the 2016 election, December of 2016. The theme of the concert was "Look on the Bright Side." And it was a powerful concert. What we do in our concerts is we bring in the community. At least while Jim McKinney was warden, we had up to 300 people come into the prison gym to hear the song and to hear these messages.
Wonderful. So while we listen, pay attention to Mary's image behind her and think about what that sounds like in that kind of setting. So here we go.
We want to be the change that we want to see in the world. The change we want to see, the change we want to be, the change we want to see, the change we want to be. We want to become. We want to be the change that we want to see in the world.
Mohandas K. Gandhi, an amazing man. He fasted, prayed, and he made a plan to remake justice non-violently. Could that be possible inside of me?
What you've done is not who you are. Set a goal. Reach for that star. Change is inevitable. Today is incredible. The future is a mystery. What will you do to make history?
Be
Inspirational.
Be
Motivational.
Be
Transformational.
Be
Sensational. Change.
your attitude,
Change.
your heroes,
Change.
your habits,
Change.
your outlook.
When I say be the, you say change. Be the change. Be the change. Be the change. Amen.
Thank you for that. It was beautiful. We hope you all enjoy that out there as well. And of course, Mary, thank you again for sharing with us your work and who you are. Incredibly important and very inspirational. So thank you for joining us for Radio OPAC, Mary. It's our pleasure to have you. So grateful.
Thank you, Jared. And just as Eddie Robertson says in his song, Black Lives Matter, we all can do better. So let us be inspired by Gandhi and let us honor the wisdom within and figure out how we can make those positive changes that are for the greatest good.
Thank you for that. For folks in the live stream, we, of course, thank you for joining us. If you haven't done so, please follow the Ohio Prison Arts Connection on our Facebook page, on Instagram. Take a look at our website. It's www.ohioprisonartsconnection.org. You'll get updates and news from OPAC and the arts and justice space, both in Ohio and around the country, of course. That wraps it up. We hope you have a wonderful holiday season, everyone. We look forward to continuing to engage with you in 2021. Thank you again for joining us for Radio OPAC. Stay good.
Stuck in our way. We're gonna make it happen. Do it today.